Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another talk with DirectShifts and Sai. And today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Lyle Berkowitz, who's the founder and CEO of KeyCare here. And he's built the nation's only virtual care company built on the Epic platform. Just want to quickly introduce him to the audience. He has more than 20 years of experience as a primary care physician and also as a health system executive and informatics expert and as a serial entrepreneur. His previous roles include being the founder and chairman of Healthfinch, chief medical officer at MDLIVE, and also served roles with Northwestern Medicine in Chicago. And he's served on numerous industry boards in the past. He's been listed as Health Leaders 20 People Who Make Healthcare Better, as well as been in the top 25 of modern healthcare's clinical informaticists. He's been elected to fellowships in the American College of Physicians, the Healthcare Information Management System Society, and he has degrees with biomedical engineering, as well as being associate professor of clinical medicine at Northwestern University. And most recently, he's the founder and CEO of KeyCare. I could go on and on talking about Dr. Lyle Berkowitz, but I've had the pleasure of working and knowing him over the past year, and I'm very, very excited about today's conversation. Before we get started, I just wanted to quickly remind the audience about us at DirectShifts and me. So I'm Sai, the CEO and founder at DirectShifts, and we at DirectShifts we connect clinicians with employers directly through an online platform for per diem, locums, telehealth, and permanent roles with transparency, speed, and trust. Our platform is AI powered, and we also have the capabilities of credentialing, scheduling, timesheets, and payroll to decrease all the friction. And we have a platform with more than 800,000 pre-vetted professionals. Less about us, but more talking about Dr. Lyle Berkowitz. I'd like to welcome Dr. Lyle Berkowitz. It's been a pleasure knowing you over the past 1 year, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come talk to us. Lyle, maybe you want to just quickly introduce yourself to the audience as well.
But I appreciate it. I love that you're doing this founder series, etc. Yeah, I'm a doctor who started out life, studying biomedical engineering, but quickly, went into the medical school route, and sort of combined those things as the world of medical informatics was being evolving in the 1990s, and yeah, I became a doctor, and then a system executive, and eventually an entrepreneur, a doctorpreneur, some people call it, and have been involved in a lot of companies over the years, while I also practiced medicine and served as a system executive at Northwestern in the IT and innovation space. And eventually, after 20 plus years, I left Northwestern to focus fully on the entrepreneurial area. I had already, been involved in a lot of companies, had founded one company, or founded lots of companies, founded one company that actually got big. That's some of the lessons learned. And then, as you said, more recently, founded a company, just 4 years ago now, called KeyCare. And we'll talk more about that later. But my life's always been this blend of sort of engineering and technology with the medicine and primary care, working in and with large health systems, and then this world of innovation, which is its own science, that I took a journey on as well, and sort of combined it all. Even wrote a book about it, the intersection of IT and innovation in healthcare. I co-authored with a friend of mine and a colleague, Chris McCarthy, who ran Kaiser's innovation group at one point. And we talked about stories from other doctors who were innovative in their own health systems. But I know today we're going to talk a little about what it's like to be a doctor who goes into business, what that means, and happy to share my lessons learned with others.
Fantastic. Maybe we can start off with your early journey as you chose biomedical engineering and then becoming a doctor. Maybe you can give an audience a background because we have a lot of young doctors in the audience. So maybe you could give a little bit of background of your personal thinking. If I were take you back to the times, maybe how did you think about life, the career you want to pursue and why you want to do it?
Yeah. So, like a lot of doctors, my father was a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor. And instead of just studying biology, I was the kid in the 1980s who was always tinkering with computers and devices, etc. So, engineering made sense. And within engineering, biomedical engineering sounded like the most fun. We got to apply engineering principles to the human body, and learn, sort of be jack of all trades of engineering, learn a little about all the different engineering mediums from electrical, mechanical, chemical, and industrial engineering, and computer engineering, of course, and apply it all to healthcare and the human body. And so it was a great grounding. But when you study biomedical engineering, it also, like being an internist, is jack of all trades, master of none. And about a third of us would go on to med school, a third would go to grad school, and a third would do something in industry, usually more in the management side. I went to University of Pennsylvania, where, of course, they have a strong business school, and I did take this one course, which always influenced me, and it was called entrepreneurship in the business school. I took another course that was all about the science of information. And those two courses probably influenced me a lot more than I realized over the time. But I knew pretty well early on that I was going to go into engineering and I was going to be a doctor. Yeah, I probably had a couple months where I thought about just continuing on the engineering path. But when I went to med school, I wasn't 100% sure what I was going to do with it. I'd, at that point, done a fair amount of computer programming and worked with a variety of doctors. But it was at med school. I went to U of I, University of Illinois, Chicago Medical School, where I met someone who became an important mentor, a guy named Dr. Elstein, and he was a PhD. He had started the Society for Medical Decision Making. He ran the Department of Education and Informatics at the med school, which is still a relatively new science. But he introduced me to this concept in this field of medical informatics, and that's where it hit me. That's what I want to do, which is basically applying computers and technology into healthcare. Remember, this is now late 80s, so it was still relatively new. But fortunately, he also had connections and allowed me to connect with some of those folks. And I spent a couple months in my last year in med school at the Harvard's Decision Systems Group, which is out at the Brigham, which was another mentor there, Dr. Bob Greenis, who really ran one of the early NLM sites on medical informatics. And I learned deeply about informatics while I was there, but realized that I didn't want to be an academic informaticist. I wanted to be an applied informaticist. And so didn't pursue a graduate degree in informatics, but did pursue during residency and then later on a variety of management scenarios where I could apply this technology and be the direct medical director, so to speak, of technology for my group. So that then takes me through residency, where I was on the computer committees after med school. And then when I joined my group, I joined as the medical director of technology, which at the time in the mid-90s, no one knew exactly what that meant, but I sort of pursued the idea of electronic medical records and bringing computers into our workflow, and had a lot of lessons learned there. And over the course of 20 years, I spent about a decade working on classic IT informatics stuff. And then the second decade sort of evolved it to set up our initial program for innovation and bring those two things together. And then along the way of those 20 years at Northwestern, I also worked with dozens of digital health startups, initially as an advisor, eventually, did fractional executive with a couple of them, started getting on some boards, and eventually founded a couple of companies, like I said, most of which didn't necessarily go anywhere, but one called Healthfinch was a workflow automation tool we founded in 2011 that eventually we ramped up, and it was one of the early sort of apps on the EMR. We focused on medication refill automation. It worked really effectively. We sold that to Health Catalyst in around 2020.
Awesome.
So I'll stop there. I'll take a breath there for a second, but
Yeah,
that sort of takes you through my time at Northwestern until about 2017.
it's fantastic, and it feels like you're one of the visionaries because you knew early on back in '80s and '90s that technology is going to play a huge role, and you already knew that hey, you started off as the medical director of technology, and it's fascinating to see how you brought on both technology and clinical expertise, into medical world. Um, what was your thinking when post residency and just going back there, when you started your first job, post residency, how did you think about like what was the you what was your journey at that time, like did you think about like hey, this is I'm seeing as an internist, and did you see hey, this is what I'm really passionate about doing, or you saw a lot of like hey, I saw a lot of opportunity bringing technology into medicine here?
Yeah, well, um, in the past, when I've done, when I've taught medical students, I'll tell you the advice that I give them is as much as you can. I said, because you're going to be really busy. You're a doctor. You're going to be obsessed with this. It's going to be, majority of your life. You'll spend more time in the clinic than you do with your family, um, and make sure you balance that. But if the more that you can take some of your outside interests, perhaps, and blend them in to being a doctor, the more enjoyable it's going to be. And so the reason why, I look like I, was read a crystal ball and thought about computers and IT, etc., was more because I liked it. I was a computer geek. I loved it. And it just made sense to me that, of course, it's going to be an important part of it. Louis Pasteur has a great quote: chance favors a prepared mind, right? And so, I was just always prepared for how might we use IT somewhere. I often called myself a lazy doctor. I went in engineering in part, and you learn in engineering, like, how do you make things easier? And when I was practicing as a doctor, from medical student to resident and then attending, I always found, I'm like, why do we do things? Why do we spend so much time repeating the same thing? So I was using, for example, Microsoft Word, for my notes, in the 80s and 90s, and typing them out and printing them out. I guess it's more the 90s at that point. And I remember I said, in the hospital, I'm like, well, why do I have to repeat the same note every time? I might as well keep it on a little floppy disk and just update it and print it out. And my notes would then be printed out in the medical record for my hospital. I get called by the Department of Medical Records to come down and talk to them. I thought I was in trouble. But this was as a resident, and they said, "How do you do this? Like, your notes are not handwritten; they're like typed out and stuff." And I explained what I did. They're like, "We wish everybody did this. We can read your notes, and they're really solid. They have everything in them." But I always felt. I remember early on in '95, I 96 when I started. I got working part-time as a fractional executive for a newer EMR company. And I just said, well, it's clear to me. And by the way, I can predict the future, maybe, but I'm not necessarily good about the timing. So it was clear to me in 1996 that within 5 years, everybody will be using electronic medical records. Again, I wasn't great on the timing, but the general direction was the right flow. And so I'm pretty good at seeing the future, just not at predicting when exactly it will happen. And by the way, the other thing I learned early on is I didn't invent any of this stuff. When I went to that informatics lab in 1991, the head of that, Dr. Greenis, gave me his thesis from like the 1960s, his PhD thesis, where he wrote about the applications of computers in healthcare. And everything we talk about today, electronic medical records, telehealth, AI, everything was spelled out in there. And so as a young, 20, I don't know, 6-year-old, I quickly saw there are no new ideas. This idea of using computers and tech in healthcare, I didn't invent it. It's not a new idea. The guys in the 1960s were still probably on the shoulders of others. The issue is all about execution. When can we do it? When does it make sense? And so the vision has always been clear. The execution of doing that from a technical perspective, financial perspective, etc., has been the much harder part. And sometimes when I get these young kids who tell me, "Oh, we invented this concept of so and so," I'm like, "You didn't invent it. If you can execute on it, that's great. But let's give credit to those in the past, who were thinking about this before many of us were even born." Um, so I've always relied and looked at the history as much as the future.
Fantastic. And fast forward to you going through your journey here, what led to you starting your first company, or were you already involved with certain companies before and you saw that as a way to start a company, or what led, maybe you can talk through like what led to you starting your first company?
Yeah, so a lot of things again was just chance that I learned stuff. So early on in my career, my first year in, I went to a dinner being thrown by this company that was doing electronic medical records. They were trying to, of course, get doctors interested in this, but it was the mid '90s. Most doctors weren't interested. I was fascinated. I asked a lot of questions. By the end of the dinner, the executive there said, "Could you be our chief medical officer?" And all of a sudden, I'm the chief medical officer of a publicly traded company. I'm doing it part time, 2 days a week, while I'm seeing patients 3 days a week, and learning about being part of a business, project management and product management, and being in a publicly traded company. And so I got my business, street degree, so to speak, and realized that the guy who's making the most money out of all this was the guy who started the company. And so over years, I said, how might I start a company, not just be involved in a company? And again, I've started a couple of companies over the years, smaller ones with other people. And you don't talk about those as much because if they're not really big, people look at some of the stuff I've done and said, "Oh, everything he does works." I'm like, no, there's plenty of failures. You got to try a lot of different things. But it was all fun and fascinating. And I advised a lot of companies. And so you just pick stuff up. But eventually, you decide, are you really going to try something? And in 2010, I was speaking at the Mayo Center for Innovation annual conference. I got asked to speak sort of a TED Talk. And I spoke on how the future of electronic medical records would be the EMR as a platform, and we'd build apps on top of it, sort of like the iStore. Remember, the iPhone had been out a couple of years at that point. And I gave an example of, imagine if we can have an app that just handle all the medication refills, because for doctors, it's a routine activity that isn't reimbursable. So I came up with this philosophy I called my SAD philosophy. How do we simplify, automate, delegate routine, repeatable activities? And I did this 10-minute TED Talk. It's still online somewhere, and talked about this concept. And afterwards, a young biomedical engineer, a PhD student, came up to me, a guy named John Barron, and he said, "Hey, I'd like to work with you and start a company on this." And I'm like, that sounds like a fun idea. Let's do it. And it's literally as crazy as that. And, a couple months later, we started the company. And I still kept my day job. I was chairman and chief medical officer of that company. He still was in his PhD program doing some side hustle work. But we got to a point where the company had a real product. We started getting clients. We raised some money. We won some contests. He quit his PhD program. He became CEO of the company. he lived on whatever money we could make. Started building a team, and eventually, we became the standard in this little niche area. And then we worked with Epic to become one of the first apps on their app orchard. We worked with Allscripts and Athena. We were often the first app on a lot of their app orchards because it's like chance favors a prepared mind. Well, it turns out timing's really important, right? So as we develop our little app, all the EMR companies start rolling out their app stores. And so we became one of the earliest apps on all these app stores, became popular, became fun, and eventually we sold to a company, Health Catalyst, to take it to the next level, and it's still around today. That sort of was my big first company. And then when I left Northwestern, I joined MDLIVE as an executive. This was an established company at this point. They needed some heavy fundraising. They needed a variety of turnarounds in the operations and clinical and product side. And so I spent a couple of years there really learning deeply what it's like to be in a big, fast-growing startup. And then took all of those things together to start KeyCare, which was a new version, sort of telehealth 2.0. This concept of what if we ran telehealth, but instead of doing it on a independent transactional little system, we did it on the operating system in healthcare, Epic, which is in 60-70% of physicians, patients using it, was much more ubiquitous, and allowed us to really be woven and coordinated into the rest of the health system. So we've built a 50-state national medical group, and we put them on Epic, and we connect it to all the other Epic sites to be a workforce augmentation tool. And we've armed our doctors with both Epic tech as well as our own tech to make them as efficient as possible. But all those things were building blocks, right? To get to there, I had to have done so many other things in so many other places.
Awesome. Fantastic. And just walking through your journey, if I were to go into a few questions there. As a physician, balancing your time seeing patients and doing stuff outside of it, a lot of physicians, it's not easy. You have your personal life, you have clinical life, and then you're looking at technology or entrepreneurship. How did you manage it, and what advice would you give to the young physicians out there?
Yeah, so I get asked a lot by young and old doctors, hey, how do I do that stuff? How can I just start a company, or, can I jump into it? One of the first pieces of advice I give is keep your day job. If you like I love being a physician, and it was super helpful to have that day job because a lot of what I did on the side didn't need me full time. In an advisory role, a board role, etc. Those are part-time, fractional jobs. And so I did a lot of this fractional type work because, the information I could provide to a company, a lot of times an hour a week was all they needed from me. With that said, when I started Healthfinch, and with these other companies, I worked a lot of nights and weekends. I enjoyed it. To me, it was fun. I didn't have a lot of other hobbies. I focused on my family with quality time, right? I couldn't give them a quantity, but, I made sure, that, I was still the soccer coach, and I still went to every possible school event, etc. When I came home, I focused on the kids, but when they went to sleep, I'm fortunate. I'm a night owl. At 10 o'clock at night, I can work for a couple hours. And so 10 o'clock till 1 or 2 in the morning, that was my time to do these other activities. That was just how I chose to live my life, and it worked out for me. But at some point, I had to decide if I'm going to really go into this full time. When you're a doctor in a business, you've got to decide: are you just going to be the fun strategy stuff? That's a couple hours a week. That's not a full-time job. If you want to go full-time, you got to expect that you're going to need to know operations, sales, fundraising. There's a lot more that you're going to have to do and learn if you're going to go full-time. So most of the advice I give to doctors who want to fool around with this, I said, start by just advising, maybe even for free. you have a great day job. You're a doctor. You're making reasonable money. Learn slowly, advise some companies, etc., and see if it's something you really want to do more full time. And if you do, you might want to work with a recruiter, etc., and go become a medical director at a larger company where you can learn some business, etc. That's usually, now, they don't always listen to me. Sometimes they jump in and try something new. Sometimes it works. Most time it doesn't. Like I said, I had a lot more failures than successes. But because I loved it all, it was never a job to me. And the truth is, some of the best advice I've read or thought on the subject is there's not a work-life balance. Get off of that. Yeah, if you think there's going to be a great work-life balance, you're probably not ready to be an entrepreneur. It is a lot of work, and you're going to wear yourself to the bone. And like I said, make sure when you're with your kids and your family, you're focused on them, because you're not going to have the same amount of time as if you just had a day job. And that's a balance you have to take and decide on for yourself. And then the other thing I'd say is there are a lot of doctors who are able to go part-time. So I was always jealous of emergency room physicians because they can really, and hospitalists, they can really parse their time out certain ways and do it. It's a little more, as a primary care doc, I did cut down my hours because I was a system executive as well. But there's a balance, and you can make that choice to not be a full-time doctor if you want to pursue some other things as well. And at some point I did spend, like I said, 3 days in the office, 2 days in the business world. And over time, I did spend less and less time with my patients in office hours, but I was still on call 24/7 for them. And so it's the choice you have to make.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, a lot of physicians, go through this and balancing this out. And I would love to go back to what you said initially, which is find what you like to do outside of work, what you're passionate about, and try to figure out how you blend that with practicing medicine. And for you, you mentioned you were a computer geek and you love tinkering with computers and coding. And this is one way you brought it back. I think that's such an important message to figure out how do you bring back what you love outside of, necessarily your profession, which is your creativity in a way, and you merge that with what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I really emphasize that advice, and beyond computers and tech, I personally love the movies. I'm a big theater movie fan. My dad was a doctor for a lot of them, and I took that on, and so I actually became the doctor to a lot of the movies and TV shows in town as well. Not because it was lucrative, but it was fun as hell. And I, and again, integrate that in. And so when I talk to doctors and maybe they like golf or ballet or something else, I'm like, figure out how to integrate it in. Yeah, you like ballet and you're in PM&R, go talk to the local ballet company and become their doctor. No one says you can't do that, and it's a way to take your love in medicine, your love outside of medicine, bring it together, and you get to cheat a little, and you get to have it all, and whatever that is. And again, in my case, I like computers and technology. That's just who I am, and so it made sense. But for whether it's whatever your passion is, the more you can bring that into medicine and do it together, I think can be that much of an enjoyable career.
Fantastic. And if we move forward to, you sold Healthfinch to Health Catalyst, and then what led to you starting KeyCare? Like, what was the transition with Healthfinch and Health Catalyst, and was it immediate, or you decided hey, there was a light bulb moment which you had that, I think the world needs this? Or as you mentioned, you knew what the future needs, but from a timing perspective, you're not thinking. What was both of those? When did you have that?
So there are two parts. One, why did I start another company? And two, why did I start this one? So, because after we sold Healthfinch, there's a bit of a transition, but relatively quickly, I was and I left MDLIVE, right? So now I was very happy fractionally consulting to a couple different companies. Investing, I became an investor in a couple of companies as well as a number of funds, and was actually having a nice balanced life. Saying to myself, well, I don't necessarily want to or need to do this again. And yet something drives us sometimes. And I was maybe getting a little bored with just doing the fractional stuff. I'm not sure. But I sat down. Remember, this is COVID. So COVID was an absolute driving factor. Because of COVID, telehealth had taken off. I had just spent the past couple of years working at one of the largest telehealth companies in the nation, so I knew a lot about telehealth. I also knew a lot about Epic. I'd helped roll out Epic at Northwestern. I had developed a company that was one of the first apps on their app orchard, and I had friends and folks at Epic. So all of a sudden, it occurred to me, well, Epic is rolling out more telehealth software. Maybe I'll go talk to them about how it can help. I mean, again, at this point, remember, we're a year into COVID, and it's still an emergency. It's still a big issue, and I'm trying to give back at this point. And I sat down with some friends at Epic, some of the executives, and we just talked about what's going on in the world, how telehealth is becoming more important, how health systems are now using Epic to do telehealth, but they sometimes have additional needs. And it just clicked for both of us that, well, it makes sense to have a company, like these national telehealth companies that is able to provide this additional resourcing, but do it on an instance of Epic that is optimized for virtual care and is connected. It just made sense. And all of a sudden I'm like, you're going to sell me an instance of Epic and I'm going to build all this? And we're like, yeah, let's do it. So we both mutually decided it made sense, to build a national medical group working on Epic so that we could provide this tech-enabled workforce to other Epic sites in a way where virtual care was more coordinated, because the traditional telehealth vendors were sort of done in a transactional vacuum that wasn't really coordinated. But all of a sudden, pre-COVID, health systems really weren't doing a lot of virtual care, weren't that interested. Post-COVID, there was a much bigger interest from patients and health systems. And so all of a sudden, we figured we'll become the de facto standard for health systems using Epic, who want to have additional virtual care workforce helping support their patients, initially for urgent care, eventually for more primary care, etc. And that's how we started the company. And like I said, every great idea starts out as a crazy idea, and it was a bit crazy, the amount of work and effort that we had to do. But I was able to build a great team, and we built out our instance of Epic that was optimized for virtual care, optimized for working with other Epic systems, and optimized it for making our doctors as efficient as possible. We have been hiring doctors, working in a variety of ways to create a true virtual primary care medical group, which was also important to me. Most of the telehealth companies, I think, look at doctors as a commodity. I look at doctors as very much the lifeblood of what we do, and I wanted to create what I had growing up, so to speak, a real primary care group. Just happens to be virtual. There are a lot of doctors now who want to be virtualists, as you know, right? This idea that they have a lot of flexibility. It's a different workflow, different lifestyle. And just like we saw the rise of the hospitalists in the 90s, I think we've seen the rise of virtualists, particularly because of COVID. And I wanted to give them a home for those who want to do more than just transactional care, who really want to be part of a true group, who want to practice primary care medicine. And we're building that home for them, such that they feel like they are part of a group, and they get to work on a real EMR. They really appreciate the fact that they're an Epic, as much as sometimes people complain about EMRs and Epic, etc. As clunky. We found that most virtualists are very excited about working on a real EMR versus the software that's out there for just transactional type of care. They get access to past medical information. They get decision support tools. We've integrated an ambient AI with a third-party vendor, and we've tried to make it as efficient and slick as possible for them. And patients love it. It's one of the main reasons doctors become virtualists. Is patients are overwhelmingly excited and happy to be seen so quickly, to have their care handled. It's basically, we're developing I call it concierge for the masses, concierge care for the masses, able to provide them the level of care that that a lot of people have to pay a lot of money to get. We're able to provide, just using standard insurance.
Fantastic. Um, what's the next, few years and journey look like for KeyCare? It's been 4 years in for you folks. You built out the technology, you built out a great team, and you have lots of clients and lots of doctors on your platform. You've probably seen thousands or hundreds of thousands of patients so far by now. What's the next few years look like for KeyCare in the evolution of your baby?
Yeah. I'd say we're in execution mode, right? When you start a company, you always are looking for product market fit. Right? Did I create something that people will pay for, that they'll use, etc.? We found very early on we had that. We had lots of health systems raise their hands, say, "Hey, we really could use your help," etc. And so we had early product market fit. The proverbial land, with health systems. So now we're trying to expand and do so as efficiently, cost effectively as possible. So we're in execution mode. That means, we've created the demand. Now we're building up supply of doctors. We're making them more efficient. So we're investing a lot in building a great group, in giving them extra technology to make them as efficient and effective as possible, so that we can scale. Um, uh, and which is, I think, the right way to do things. Prove that people want your stuff, and then start investing in ways to scale it. So right now, we work with 20 plus health systems, which, if you look at the nation, there are about 625 health systems, 400 plus use Epic. So at 20 plus health systems, we're at about 5% of the Epic sites. We believe that we can go from 20 to 40 to 80 to 100 Epic sites. At the same time, we're starting to talk to a variety of other types of industries in healthcare, right? The payers, the labs, etc. All of whom Epic now supports as well. Epic has Epic Payer Platform. A lot of the major payers have an instance of Epic we can communicate with. Epic has Aura, which allows labs to more easily connect into the Epic ecosystem. And they're expanding into other areas as well. So the more we can become the easy access, quick turn on for virtual care, as for any of these places using Epic, the better. But we also can support folks who aren't using Epic. Just being on Epic allows us to be part of the national interoperability networks much more easily as well. So my ultimate goal, is to be the best, national virtual medical group, supporting health systems who need extra help, and helping those health systems transform how they manage a population. My ultimate goal is to say, "Hey, health system, why don't you load balance some of the really routine stuff to us, because you're overwhelmed? Let your doctors, your officeologists, open up more room for the more complex care, and so we can better manage a population." It's just population health and team-based care 101, but we're able to execute on it, right? No new ideas. We got to execute on it. And we can execute on a way that makes sense at the same time as we look to payers and labs, employers, and pharma, etc. There are other opportunities out there for National Medical Group. Again, being on Epic gives us an advantage that that we think makes sense to have more access to care, more coordination of care over time.
Awesome. So, that's the future of KeyCare. And, I know you built out a great team, and now you've taken a little bit of, probably a backseat and just watching the team grow and, do their job. And I know you humbly call it execution mode, but it's actually a growth mode that you folks are in. So it's fascinating. What about you? What's next for you in your, in your next phase?
Yeah. So yeah, over the past couple of months, I've shifted where, as I said, have built a great team, handed off day to day to them, and I've moved to the chairman role. So it allows me to really focus on strategy, business development, etc. I'm still remaining with KeyCare, but yeah, I am able to have a little more of a heightened view of working with KeyCare. And quite honestly, I'm getting to that point where, I want to, spend what time I can with family, friends, etc. But there's a wide world out there, lots of interesting things. I've had a lot of, individuals and companies, etc., ask me to help them out, and it gives me a little more free time to help out others. The proverbial, process of life: learn, earn, return. Yeah, I'm moving into that next stage. So I'm working with, I'm looking to work with some additional companies that I'm just helping, give a little light touch advice to. Individually, I mentor and talk to a lot of folks, doctors and others who want to do something great in healthcare. And I'm always happy as best I can to provide a little advice, lessons learned from myself to give back, whether it be speaking at a conference, individually talking to folks. In Chicago, we have a very healthy, robust group of folks. In the startup world, we have a group called Matter, which is a nonprofit that supports digital health companies. And we have another one called MHub, which focuses on hard tech, and about a third of what they do is medical device. Again, I'm an investor in a couple of companies and a couple of funds. And so there's plenty to do. Healthcare has lots of issues. And so I'll continue to be a pundit. I like to post on LinkedIn about stories, and particularly in the virtual health, digital health space. And like I said, I'll continue for the next couple of years, helping a variety of companies, helping people, giving my thoughts on how and what we should be doing. Healthcare is in as great a need as ever to be improved, and to do so in a cost-effective way. And so there'll be plenty for me to do in the next couple of years, as well as, as I get older, having a great healthcare system's personally important to me. So I've loved seeing all the graduations. I look back in 1996, thinking that within 5 years everything will be computerized. We're still not there, but I remain hopeful that we'll get there sooner rather than later.
That's great. A small fun fact, DirectShifts as well, in the early stages of our founding, we were part of Matter in Chicago. And
Oh,
the
you were,
ecosystem
yeah.
is, yes, and the
Hmm.
ecosystem was wonderful. And, since I'm based in New York City, I do think there's so much value in having like a Matter in Chicago, the same way in New York City, San Francisco. It's so helpful to have the healthcare innovation systems like Matter in these cities. It's fantastic. So just a small fun fact there. Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah,
Um,
no, glad to
Great.
hear that they do a great job.
Yeah. If you look into, future, the next 5 years, 10 years, where do you see healthcare in the US being in the next 5 to 10 years, or where do you see it, or where would you like to see it? Where would you like to see it grow, and what would you like to have if things are not here?
Yeah, well, yeah, I have a couple of philosophies. One is that, we don't have a shortage of doctors as much as we have a shortage of using them efficiently. So, well, yeah, it's easy to say AI is going to fix a lot of stuff, but I do think, AI will continue to improve healthcare. But I don't think we need AI to help with diagnosis. Diagnosis is not hard. Now and then you've got a Dr. House case, etc. But the vast majority of healthcare problems we have is patient engagement, and patient understanding of what is going on, right? And we have to figure out how to use AI to help make sure patients do just the routine stuff they need to do. Most healthcare is relatively routine. you know, Eat better, exercise, take your medicines, simple things like that that if people did, we'd have a much lower healthcare burden. And we don't, the idea of using AI to diagnose complex diseases, there's a role for that, and to help with treatment, management options, et cetera. Very cool stuff. But that is not necessarily, I think, the biggest use of AI. I think the most important use of AI will be, having patients have an AI companion who really helps them with their healthcare. But at the end of the day, patients are patients and people are people, and they don't love to do something that what feels like extra work without immediate benefits. It's why they love the GLPs, right? Yeah, you could either radically change your diet and exercise, or take a shot once a week, and people will take that shot. It's helping. We're going to see, the long-term implications will be interesting. That seems to be working really well. It's expensive. There'll be an interesting trade-off over time. But I do think that we will see, I'd like to see AI being a companion to help doctors, a companion to help patients. And, but with that said, I think that the future companies that are going to come out really should be focusing, when I talk to doctors and give them advice, on niches, rather than everybody wants to be the big platform and be the multi-billion-dollar company. Well, guess what? You're not going to, maybe there'll be one, but set your focus a little smaller, and start figuring out how to do some niches. And I think then we'll probably see some companies buying up a bunch of those together. But if we look at traditionally how to start a successful company right now, I'd always start with a niche. You can maybe build out a platform later. But when I think about if I'm going to start any new companies, or more likely help some young entrepreneurs start a new company, I'd say let's figure out a niche that where we can apply all this cool AI and tech, do that really well, and then decide if that's something that we want to expand or not. But boy, it's getting easier and easier to start companies, and so it's going to be fun to see what happens over the next couple of years. This is similar to the explosion, 25 years ago with the internet. We still have a couple of years of seeing an explosion of things happening in AI.
Fascinating. Yeah, this is something we have internally as well from DirectShifts, which we kind of borrowed from the Y Combinators of the world, which is, as you said, dominate a niche. We have something which is, it's easier and it's better to have 100 customers or clients who love you rather than have 10,000 clients or customers who are like, meh, you know what, they're okay, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
So it's like what you said, have that niche and just dominate that niche versus just trying to be the generalist of everything there.
Hmm.
Um, Folks, lots of potential ideas from what Lyle just mentioned in there for people in the audience to go build. We talked about AI and companions and VICs, so lots of ideas to gather from Lyle's last few comments there about like, hey, what would the future look like there? So thank you, Lyle. This has been fascinating. Thank you. You've been very generous. I know from personal experience as well, you're a very generous person. Thank you for taking the time and spending it with us and with the audience. Wish you all the very best in the next few chapters of, as your phase, as you mentioned, of returning stuff. So
Yeah.
thank you so
Well,
much.
I appreciate it. Had a good time. Thanks, Si.